My sister looked me dead in the eye at my own bachelorette party and said the words that shattered my world. I seduced your fiancé, and he loved every second of it. What she didn't know was that karma was already working behind the scenes, and my wedding day would become her worst nightmare. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Tina Morrison, and 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect life mapped out ahead of me. I was marrying Derek Sullivan, the man I'd been with for 3 years, and my sister Vanessa was supposed to be my maid of honor. Looking back now, I should have seen the warning signs, but love has a way of making you blind to the people closest to you. Derek and I met at a marketing conference in Denver. He was charming, ambitious, and had this infectious laugh that could light up any room. We clicked immediately over shared interests in hiking and terrible reality TV shows. 6 months of long-distance dating turned into him relocating to Portland to be with me, and 2 years later, he proposed during a weekend trip to Crater Lake. My sister Vanessa had always been the wild child of the family. At 26, she was 2 years younger than me, but somehow always managed to be the center of attention wherever we went. She had this magnetic personality that drew people in, especially men. Growing up, I'd watched her charm her way out of trouble countless times, while I was the responsible, older sister who followed the rules and kept my head down. When Derek proposed, Vanessa seemed genuinely happy for us. She threw herself into wedding planning with an enthusiasm that surprised me, constantly texting ideas for venues, flowers, and themes. She even offered to organize my bachelorette party, insisting it would be her gift to me as the maid of honor. "Trust me, Tina," she said with that mischievous grin I knew so well. "I'm going to give you a night you'll never forget." The months leading up to the wedding flew by in a blur of dress fittings, venue visits, and endless decision-making. Derek seemed stressed about work, often staying late at the office and coming home exhausted. His marketing firm had landed a major client, and he was pulling long hours to impress the partners. I tried to be understanding, even when our dinner dates got canceled or he fell asleep during our movie nights. Vanessa, on the other hand, was around more than ever. She'd drop by our apartment unannounced, sometimes when Derek was there alone. She claimed she was helping with wedding preparations, bringing fabric samples or discussing catering options. I appreciated the help, especially with my own demanding schedule as a project manager at a tech startup. 3 weeks before the wedding, I noticed Derek acting distantly. He became secretive about his phone, taking calls in the other room and quickly closing laptop screens when I walked by. When I asked about it, he brushed it off as work stress and assured me everything would calm down after we got back from our honeymoon. The bachelorette party was scheduled for the Saturday night before our wedding week. Vanessa had planned everything at a trendy rooftop bar in downtown Portland, complete with a private section and bottle service. She invited 12 of my closest friends, including my college roommate Sarah, my work friends, and a few cousins. The evening started perfectly. We had dinner at my favorite Italian restaurant and then headed to the rooftop bar. The Portland skyline looked spectacular against the sunset, and I felt like I was living in a dream. My friends surprised me with a custom sash and tiara, and we took dozens of photos as the night began. Vanessa was in her element, making toasts and keeping everyone entertained with her stories. She'd always been the life of the party, and tonight was no exception. But as the drinks flowed, I noticed something different in her demeanor. There was an edge to her jokes, a sharpness in her smiles that I couldn't quite place. Around 10 o'clock, most of my friends were dancing or mingling, and I found myself alone with Vanessa on the quieter side of the rooftop. The city lights twinkled below us, and I was feeling emotional about how perfect the night had been. "Thank you for organizing all this," I told her, squeezing her hand. "It means everything to me that you put so much effort into making this special." Vanessa smiled, but there was something cold in her eyes. "Oh, Tina, you have no idea how special this night really is." Before I could ask what she meant, she took a long sip of her martini and leaned closer to me. "Actually, there's something I need to tell you. Something about Derek. My heart skipped. What about Derek? Well, she said, her voice taking on a casual tone that made my stomach drop. Remember all those times I came over to help with wedding planning? All those late nights when Derek was working and I just happened to stop by? I nodded slowly, a terrible feeling building in my chest. Vanessa's smile widened. I wasn't really there for wedding planning, sweetie. I was there for Derek. And let me tell you, he was very receptive to my assistance. The rooftop seemed to spin around me. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that I've been sleeping with your fiancé for the past 2 months, she said with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. And the best part? He can't get enough of me. Just last week, while you were at that work conference in Seattle, we spent the entire weekend in your bed. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The sounds of the party faded into background noise as her words sank in. You're lying. Am I? Vanessa pulled out her phone and started scrolling through her messages. Should I show you the texts, the photos? Or maybe you'd prefer to hear about how he told me he's been having second thoughts about marrying you. My friends were laughing and dancing just 20 feet away, completely oblivious to the fact that my world was crumbling. I stared at Vanessa, searching her face for any sign that this was some sick joke, but all I saw was cruel satisfaction. Why? I whispered. Because I could, she shrugged. Because you always got everything handed to you. The good grades, the perfect job, the nice apartment, and now you thought you were getting the perfect husband, too. I just wanted to see if he was really as devoted as he pretended to be. He's my fiancé, Vanessa. We're getting married in a week. Are you, though? She laughed again. Because from where I'm standing, Derek seems pretty torn. In fact, he asked me to meet him tomorrow night to figure things out. His words, not mine. I felt sick. The alcohol, the shock, the betrayal, it all hit me at once, and I gripped the railing to steady myself. My sister, the person I'd trusted to stand beside me on my wedding day, had systematically destroyed my relationship and seemed to be enjoying every second of it. You seduced my fiancé, I said, more to myself than to her. I seduced your fiancé, she confirmed with a triumphant grin, and he loved every second of it. The way he touches me, the way he whispers my name. Oh, Tina, it's nothing like how he is with you. With me, he's passionate, alive. With you, he's just settling. The cruelty in her voice was like a physical blow. This wasn't my sister anymore. This was someone who had deliberately set out to hurt me in the deepest way possible, and she was reveling in her success. But as I stood there gripping that railing and fighting back tears, something unexpected happened. Instead of breaking down completely, I felt a cold clarity wash over me. Vanessa thought she'd won. She thought she'd destroyed me and taken everything I cared about. What she didn't know was that she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache that had nothing to do with the alcohol. Vanessa's words echoed in my mind like a broken record. I'd somehow managed to finish the bachelorette party without completely falling apart, making excuses about feeling sick and leaving early with Sarah covering for me. Derek was already gone when I got up, which wasn't unusual for a Sunday. He often went for early morning runs, then grabbed coffee and worked on his laptop at the local cafe. But today, his absence felt different. Every empty space in our apartment seemed to mock me. I made coffee with shaking hands and tried to process what had happened. Part of me wanted to believe Vanessa was lying, that this was some twisted joke or a jealous fantasy. But the details she'd mentioned, the knowing look in her eyes, the way Derek had been acting lately, it all painted a picture I couldn't ignore. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Running late today, meeting a client for brunch. See you tonight. Love you. A client? On Sunday? I stared at the message, wondering if this was another lie, or if I was becoming paranoid. The Derek I'd fallen in love with wouldn't do this to me, but then again, I never thought Vanessa would either.
I decided I needed proof before confronting anyone. If I was going to blow up my life a week before my wedding, I needed to be absolutely certain. I started in Derek's home office, looking through his desk drawers and checking his laptop history, but everything seemed normal. Work emails, wedding planning documents, nothing suspicious. Then I remembered Vanessa mentioning photos. My stomach churned as I realized I needed to check Derek's phone, but he always kept it with him. I'd have to wait for the right opportunity. That opportunity came sooner than expected. Around 2 in the afternoon, Derek came home and immediately jumped in the shower. He'd left his phone charging on the nightstand, and I could hear the water running. My hands trembled as I picked up his phone. I knew his passcode. We'd never hidden things from each other before. The irony wasn't lost on me as I typed in the numbers. The first thing I checked was his messages. There it was, a thread with Vanessa that made my blood run cold. Weeks of flirtatious texts, explicit photos, and plans to meet up. The most recent message was from that morning. "Last night was perfect. When can I see you again?" Derek had responded, "Need to figure things out with T first. This is getting complicated." Vanessa had replied, "It's only complicated if you make it complicated. You know where your heart really is." I scrolled up through weeks of messages, each one feeling like a knife in my chest. They'd been planning this whole thing, coordinating their meetings around my schedule, laughing about how oblivious I was. There were photos that made me physically sick, intimate moments in what was supposed to be our sanctuary. But the worst part was reading Derek's messages about me. "Tina's so trusting. She doesn't suspect anything. She's at that work retreat all weekend. We have the place to ourselves. Sometimes I feel guilty, but being with you feels so right."
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The shower was still running, giving me more time to dig deeper. I found deleted photos in his recently deleted folder, images of him and Vanessa together, in our apartment, in our bed, wearing clothes I'd bought him. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I felt numb. I quickly forwarded several key messages and photos to my own phone, then deleted the evidence of doing so. By the time Derek came out of the bathroom, I was sitting on the couch pretending to read a magazine, his phone back in its original position. "Hey, babe," he said, kissing the top of my head like nothing had happened. "How are you feeling after last night? Sarah said you weren't feeling well." The casual way he lied to my face made my skin crawl. "I'm fine, just wedding stress, I think." "Well, we only have 6 more days," he said with a smile that now seemed fake. "Then it'll all be perfect." Perfect. The word tasted bitter. I watched him get dressed, noting how he styled his hair more carefully than usual, how he chose his nicest casual shirt. He was getting ready for someone, and it wasn't me. "I have to run out for a few hours," he said, pocketing his phone. "Some last-minute work stuff to wrap up before the wedding." On a Sunday? You know how it is with the Henderson account. They don't respect boundaries. Another lie delivered with practiced ease. After he left, I called Sarah. She came over within an hour, bringing wine and tissues, somehow knowing I needed both. "Tell me everything," she said, settling onto my couch. I showed her the screenshots I'd taken, watching her face change from confusion to anger to disgust. Sarah had never particularly liked Vanessa, always saying there was something off about her, but even she seemed shocked by the depth of the betrayal. "Tina, this is beyond horrible. What are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? Cancel the wedding? Confront them both? Pack my bags and disappear? The thought of calling off everything with 6 days' notice, losing all the deposits, explaining to family and friends, it felt overwhelming. "I don't know," I admitted. "The wedding is Saturday. We have the rehearsal dinner Friday night. Everyone's already made arrangements, taken time off work, booked hotels." "Forget the money and the logistics," Sarah said firmly. "You cannot marry this man. And your sister? Tina, what she did is unforgivable." "I know that, but I also know Vanessa. She's expecting me to fall apart, cancel everything, and let her win. She wants me to be the broken, humiliated sister who couldn't keep her man." A plan started forming in my mind, fueled by anger and a desperate need for justice.
If Vanessa thought she could destroy my life and walk away laughing, she was wrong. If Derek thought he could betray me and then stand at an altar and promise to love and honor me, he was delusional. "What if I don't cancel the wedding?" I said slowly. Sarah looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "What do you mean?" "What if I let them think they've gotten away with it? What if I go through with everything as planned?" "Tina, you're in shock. You're not thinking clearly." But I was thinking more clearly than I had in months. Every piece was falling into place in my mind. The rehearsal dinner is at the Grand Ballroom downtown. 200 guests, including both families, Derek's business partners, all our friends. What if that became the venue for a different kind of announcement? Sarah's eyes widened as she began to understand. "You want to expose them publicly?" "I want them to experience the same humiliation they've put me through. But more than that, I want consequences, real consequences." I spent the rest of Sunday planning. By Monday morning, I had a strategy that would give Vanessa and Derek exactly what they deserved, served with a side of poetic justice that would make the betrayal pale in comparison to what was coming for them. The countdown to my wedding had begun, but not in the way anyone expected. Monday through Wednesday passed in a strange blur of wedding preparations and secret planning. I moved through the motions like an actress playing a role, smiling at the florist, confirming details with the caterer, pretending everything was normal while my world had fundamentally shifted. The hardest part was acting naturally around Derek. He came home each evening with wedding-related updates, discussing seating arrangements and timeline details with the enthusiasm of a devoted groom. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Watching the man who'd been cheating on me for months get excited about flower arrangements and dinner menus. Tuesday afternoon, I met with my wedding planner, Michelle, under the pretense of making final adjustments. What I was really doing was much more calculated.
"I want to add a special element to the rehearsal dinner," I told her. "A surprise slideshow presentation." Michelle's eyes lit up. "What a sweet idea! Photos from your relationship?" "Something like that. I'll handle all the technical aspects. I just need you to make sure the AV system is ready and that everyone's attention is focused on the screen when I give the signal." "Of course. Derek will be so surprised, and your families will love it." If only she knew. I spent Tuesday evening creating what would become the centerpiece of my revenge. Every screenshot, every photo, every piece of evidence I'd gathered was carefully compiled into a presentation that would leave no doubt about what had been happening behind my back. Wednesday brought the arrival of out-of-town guests. My parents flew in from Phoenix, Derek's family came from Seattle, and various relatives and friends descended on Portland for what they thought would be a celebration of love. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. All these people had traveled across the country to witness what was supposed to be the beginning of my happily ever after. Vanessa was in her element, playing the role of devoted sister and maid of honor. She helped my mom with her outfit, charmed Derek's parents at the welcome lunch, and made sure everyone knew how integral she'd been to the wedding planning process. "I just love seeing my big sister so happy," she gushed to our Aunt Carol. "Derek is perfect for her. I feel like I know him so well after all the time we've spent together planning this wedding." The audacity was breathtaking. She was literally gloating about her betrayal in coded language, and no one had any idea. Derek was equally duplicitous, playing the nervous but excited groom to perfection. He thanked Vanessa multiple times for all her help, even hugging her a little too long in front of our families. I watched these interactions with a detached fascination, like studying specimens under a microscope. Wednesday evening, I received a text from Vanessa. "Can't wait for tomorrow night. The rehearsal dinner is going to be so special. I have a feeling it will be a night everyone remembers forever." She had no idea how right she was. Thursday morning brought the final dress fitting and a lunch with my bridesmaids. The other women chatted excitedly about the upcoming festivities, but I felt myself studying their faces, wondering how they'd react when they learned the truth. Sarah kept giving me concerned looks, knowing what I knew, but not knowing exactly what I had planned. That afternoon, Derek left for his bachelor party,
a low-key evening of dinner and drinks with his groomsmen. The timing was perfect. It gave me the entire evening to finalize my preparations without worrying about his whereabouts. I spent hours perfecting the presentation, making sure every piece of evidence was properly sequenced for maximum impact. I practiced my speech, the words I'd say when the lights came back up and 200 guests were staring at the screen in shocked silence. Around 10 p.m., I got a call from my cousin Jake, one of Derek's groomsmen. "Hey, Tina, I hope this doesn't upset you, but I thought you should know. Derek left the bachelor party early, said he had something important to take care of." My blood ran cold, but not from surprise. Did he say what? No, just that he'd catch up with everyone tomorrow. The guys were a little confused, but you know how grooms get before the big day. I thanked Jake and hung up, then immediately checked the tracking app on Derek's phone. We'd installed it months ago for safety reasons when he started traveling more for work. The little dot showed his location clearly. He wasn't at home or at any legitimate late-night venue. He was at Vanessa's apartment across town. The night before our wedding, while our families slept peacefully in their hotel rooms, dreaming of the celebration to come, my fiancé was with my sister. The betrayal felt complete, but so did my resolve. I took screenshots of his location and added them to my presentation. The evidence was now ironclad, not just historical proof of their affair, but real-time documentation of Derek choosing Vanessa over me on the eve of our wedding. Friday arrived with perfect October weather. The rehearsal went smoothly at the church, with everyone playing their roles to perfection. Vanessa practiced walking down the aisle as my maid of honor. Derek ran through his vows about loving and cherishing me forever, and I stood there knowing exactly what was going to happen in a few hours. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Grand Ballroom, a stunning venue with crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. Michelle had outdone herself with the setup: round tables draped in ivory linens, centerpieces of white roses and eucalyptus, and a head table where the wedding party would sit. As guests arrived and cocktail hour began, I mingled normally, accepting congratulations and well wishes from family and friends. Derek stayed close to my side, playing the attentive groom, while Vanessa worked the room with her characteristic charm. My parents gave a touching toast about watching their daughter find true love. Derek's father spoke about welcoming me into their family. The best man told embarrassing stories from college that made everyone laugh. And then it was my turn.
Thank you all so much for being here tonight, I began, standing at the microphone with a smile that felt painted on. Tomorrow is going to be the most important day of my life, and having all of you here to celebrate with Derek and me means everything. I paused, looking around the room at the faces of everyone I cared about most in the world. Before we continue with dinner, I've prepared a special presentation, a little surprise that I think will show everyone exactly what kind of relationship Derek and I have built together. Derek looked confused but pleased. Vanessa was smiling encouragingly from her seat at the head table. My parents beamed with pride. Michelle dimmed the lights and nodded at me. The presentation screen descended from the ceiling. "This is a story about love, trust, and family," I announced as the first slide appeared. What happened next would change everything. The first slide that appeared on the screen was innocent enough, a photo of Derek and me from our first date 3 years ago. The room filled with appreciative murmurs as guests recognized the sweet gesture of showing our relationship timeline. "When Derek and I first met," I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "I thought I'd found my soulmate, someone honest, loyal, and trustworthy." The next few slides continued the facade: our first vacation together, holidays with family, the proposal at Crater Lake. Derek was beaming, probably thinking this was exactly the kind of romantic surprise he'd expect from his devoted fiancé. But as many of you know, the most important relationships in our lives aren't always romantic ones. Family bonds, especially between sisters, are supposed to be sacred and unbreakable. A photo of Vanessa and me from childhood appeared, followed by recent pictures of us together at various wedding planning events.
Vanessa's smile was starting to look a little forced, but she was still playing along. My sister Vanessa has been such an integral part of this wedding process. In fact, she's been far more involved in my relationship with Derek than I initially realized. The room was still warm and receptive, but I caught Sarah's sharp intake of breath from across the room. She knew what was coming. So I thought tonight would be the perfect time to share with everyone just how close Vanessa and Derek have become. The slide changed, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. On the screen was a screenshot of text messages between Derek and Vanessa, dated just 2 weeks earlier. The intimate nature of the conversation was unmistakable. Derek's face went white. "Tina, what—" "Please, let me finish," I said calmly, clicking to the next slide. "I think everyone should see the full picture." More screenshots appeared, progressively more explicit messages, photos that made several guests gasp audibly, and time-stamped conversations that made it clear this had been going on for months. The evidence was unavoidable and undeniable. My mother stood up so quickly she knocked over her wine glass. "Tina, sweetheart, what is this?" "This, Mom, is what my loving sister and devoted fiancé have been doing behind my back for the past 2 months." The room erupted. Derek jumped up from his seat, his face a mixture of panic and anger. "Turn that off right now." "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Aren't you proud of your relationship? Vanessa certainly seems to be." I clicked to the next slide, a photo Vanessa had sent Derek just that morning, along with a message that read, "Can't wait to celebrate getting rid of your boring fiancé tonight." Vanessa finally found her voice. "You're taking those messages out of context. This isn't what it looks like." "Really?" I advanced to the next slide. Derek's location data from the previous night, clearly showing him at her apartment until 2 a.m. Derek's father stood up, his face purple with rage. "Derek, tell me this isn't true." But Derek couldn't seem to form words. He was staring at the screen in horror as more evidence appeared. Photos taken in our apartment, in our bed, wearing clothes I'd bought him as gifts. The final slide was a video message Vanessa had sent Derek earlier that week. Her voice filled the ballroom through the sound system. "I can't wait until after the wedding when we don't have to sneak around anymore. Once you divorce her, we can finally be together openly. This whole wedding is just a formality we have to get through." The silence that followed was deafening. 200 guests sat in stunned shock, processing what they'd just witnessed. My grandmother was fanning her napkin. Derek's mother was crying openly. Several of his groomsmen were staring at him in disgust. Vanessa tried one last desperate play. "Tina, you don't understand. Derek came to me because he was having doubts about marrying you. I was just trying to help him figure out his feelings."
By sleeping with him? I interrupted. By planning to continue the relationship after my wedding? By laughing about how trusting and boring I am? The projection screen showed one final message exchange from that very afternoon. "Derek, after tomorrow night, we won't have to hide anymore. Vanessa, I can't wait to see Tina's face when she realizes you never really loved her." "Well, Vanessa," I said, looking directly at her for the first time since the presentation began, "here's my face. How do I look?" She was crying now, her carefully applied makeup running down her cheeks. "You don't understand. We never meant for this to happen. We fell in love." "You fell in love?" My voice rose for the first time that evening. "Is that what you call seducing your sister's fiancé? Is that what you call plotting to destroy my marriage before it even begins?" Derek finally found his voice, but it came out as a whisper. "Tina, please, let's talk about this privately." "Privately?" I laughed, a sound that seemed to echo off the ballroom's walls. "Like how you two talked privately in my bed? Like how you privately decided to make me a fool in front of everyone I love?" I turned to address the room.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry you had to witness this, but I thought you deserved to know the truth before tomorrow's ceremony. As you can imagine, the wedding is canceled. The room exploded into chaos. My father was on his feet, shouting at Derek. Derek's groomsmen were backing away from him like he had a contagious disease. Vanessa's friends were staring at her in shock and disgust. But the chaos was just beginning. As guests began to process what they'd learned, the real consequences of Derek and Vanessa's betrayal started to unfold. Derek's business partner, who was seated at table 6, stood up and addressed Derek directly. "I hope you realize this reflects on the entire firm. We'll be discussing your future with the company first thing Monday morning." My Uncle Robert, who happened to be a prominent attorney in Portland, was already on his phone. "Vanessa, you might want to call a lawyer. What you've done could have serious legal implications." Derek was trying to explain himself to his parents, but his father cut him off. "Don't say another word to me. I'm ashamed to call you my son." The beautiful rehearsal dinner had become a public trial, and Derek and Vanessa were both being found guilty by a jury of their peers. The humiliation I'd felt at my bachelorette party was nothing compared to what they were experiencing now. But I wasn't done yet. The real justice was still to come. As the chaos continued to unfold around us, I stepped away from the microphone and walked calmly to the head table where Derek and Vanessa sat in stunned silence. The contrast between their earlier confidence and current devastation was almost artistic. "There's more," I announced, pulling out an envelope from my purse. "Since we're all here together, I thought this would be the perfect time to share some additional surprises." Derek's head snapped up. "What else could you possibly—" "Remember how you've been staying late at work so much lately?" I interrupted, opening the envelope. "Well, I got curious about all those overtime hours you've been claiming." I pulled out several printed emails and handed them to Derek's business partner, James, who was still standing nearby looking disgusted. "I thought you might find these interesting, James. Turns out, Derek has been falsifying his timesheets for the past 2 months, claiming to work evenings and weekends when he was actually with my sister." James scanned the documents, his expression growing darker by the second. "These are Derek's submitted hours versus the actual building security logs. Derek, you've been committing timesheet fraud." "That's not fraud," Derek stammered. "I was working from home some of those nights." "At Vanessa's apartment?" I pulled out my phone and showed the location data again. "Because according to this, you spent very little time at home or at the office during all those claimed work hours." The color drained from Derek's face as he realized the legal implications. Timesheet fraud wasn't just grounds for termination, it could result in criminal charges and civil liability. But I wasn't finished with Derek yet. I turned to address his parents, who were sitting in shocked silence at table 2. "Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, you might also be interested to know that Derek has been using the credit card you gave him for wedding expenses to pay for hotel rooms and expensive dinners with Vanessa." I handed Derek's mother a stack of credit card statements I'd printed from Derek's email. The Riverside Hotel, Le Bernardin Restaurant, that spa weekend in Napa Valley that he told you was a work retreat, all of it, paid for with your money, all of it spent on his affair with my sister. Derek's mother gasped, clutching the papers with trembling hands. "Derek, we trusted you. We gave you that card to help with wedding costs." "I can explain," Derek began, but his father cut him off.
Explain what? How did you steal from us to cheat on your fiancé? How have you been lying to our faces for months? The public humiliation was becoming complete, but Vanessa seemed to think she could still salvage something. She stood up, mascara streaking down her cheeks, and tried to address the room. "Everyone, please, you don't understand. Derek and I never wanted to hurt anyone. We tried to fight our feelings, but sometimes love just happens." "Love?" Our mother's voice cut through the ballroom like a blade. She'd been silent since the revelation began, but now she stood with a fury I'd never seen before. "You call this love, Vanessa?" "Mom, if you'd just listen." "I listened to you lie to my face for months," Mom interrupted.
I watched you pretend to care about your sister's happiness while you were destroying it behind her back. This isn't love, Vanessa. This is cruelty." Dad joined Mom, his disappointment palpable. "We raised you girls to support each other, to be each other's strongest allies. What you've done is unforgivable." But the consequences were extending far beyond family disappointment. My cousin Jake, who worked in social media marketing, was already documenting everything on his phone. "Dude, this is going to be everywhere by morning," he told Derek. "Your entire professional network is going to know about this." And he was right. I could see other guests discreetly recording, posting updates, sending messages. In the age of social media, Derek and Vanessa's betrayal would become public knowledge within hours. Then came the coup de grace. I pulled out one final document from my purse, a legal paper that I'd had prepared by my Uncle Robert earlier that week. "Derek, this is a breach of contract notice," I announced. "Since you signed a prenuptial agreement that included a fidelity clause, your infidelity voids any claim you might have had to shared assets or spousal support." Derek's face went ashen. "We don't have shared assets." "Actually, we do. The apartment lease is in both our names, but I paid the security deposit and all the furniture costs. The car you've been driving is registered in my name. And that engagement ring? According to Oregon law, it was a conditional gift contingent on marriage." I held out my hand. "I'll need that back." Derek stared at me in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. You can remove it yourself, or security can help you. Your choice." The ballroom had gone silent again, everyone watching to see what Derek would do. His hands shook as he slowly pulled the ring from his finger and placed it in my palm. But Vanessa wasn't going down without a fight. She suddenly launched into a desperate speech that only made things worse. "Fine, you want the truth? Derek never loved you the way he loves me. He told me your relationship was boring, that you were more like roommates than lovers. He was planning to leave you anyway. I just helped him realize it sooner." The cruelty in her words was breathtaking, but they also served as the final nail in her own coffin. Every remaining shred of sympathy in the room evaporated. My grandmother, who'd been silent through the entire ordeal, slowly stood up and walked over to Vanessa. At 85 years old, she commanded respect from everyone in our family. "Vanessa," she said quietly, "you are no longer welcome in this family. Pack your things and leave town. If I ever see you again, it will be too soon." The finality in her voice was chilling. In our family, when Grandma Rose spoke, everyone listened. Vanessa had just been effectively disowned. As the evening wound down, guests began filtering out, many stopping to offer me support and express their disgust with Derek and Vanessa's behavior. Derek's own groomsmen refused to acknowledge him, and several family members blocked his attempts to explain himself. By the time the ballroom was nearly empty, Derek and Vanessa sat alone at the head table, completely isolated. Their betrayal had cost them everything: their relationships, their reputations, their families, and their futures. I watched them for a moment, feeling something I hadn't expected: pity. They'd destroyed their lives for a relationship built on lies and betrayal. Whatever they thought they had together would never survive the foundation of deception it was built on. As I prepared to leave, Derek made one last desperate attempt. "Tina, please, can we just talk? I know I messed up, but maybe we can work through this?" I turned to look at him one final time. "Derek, there's nothing left to work through. You made your choice when you decided my sister was worth more than our 3-year relationship. Live with it." 6 months later, I heard through mutual friends that Derek and Vanessa's relationship had imploded within weeks of the rehearsal dinner. Turns out, a relationship based on betraying someone else doesn't have much of a foundation for trust. Derek lost his job, faced criminal charges for the timesheet fraud, and had to move back in with his parents. Vanessa left Portland entirely, too ashamed to stay in a city where everyone knew what she'd done. As for me,
I took the money I would have spent on the honeymoon and went to Italy by myself. It was the best trip of my life. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's living well while the people who wronged you face the natural consequences of their actions. And sometimes justice really is served best in front of 200 witnesses. The week following the rehearsal dinner disaster was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. What should have been my honeymoon period instead became a whirlwind of legal meetings, damage control, and unexpected revelations that made Derek and Vanessa's betrayal seem even worse than I'd initially realized. Monday morning brought the first surprise. My phone rang at 7 a.m. It was Marcus Chen, Derek's former colleague at the marketing firm. "Tina, I hope you don't mind me calling, but after what happened Friday night, I felt like I had to tell you something. Derek wasn't just stealing time from the company, he was using confidential client information to impress your sister." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "Remember that big Henderson account he was always talking about? The one that supposedly kept him working late? He was sharing strategy documents and campaign details with Vanessa. She works for a competing firm, right?" I sat down heavily on my couch. Vanessa worked for Peterson and Associates, a boutique marketing agency that had been trying to steal clients from Derek's firm for years. "Are you telling me this was corporate espionage?" "I can't prove it yet, but the timeline is suspicious. 3 clients that Derek had access to suddenly dropped our firm in the past month and signed with Peterson and Associates. The proposals they accepted were almost identical to our internal strategy documents." This revelation hit me like a freight train. The affair wasn't just personal betrayal, it was potentially a calculated business scheme. Vanessa hadn't just seduced my fiancé, she'd used him to steal company secrets. I immediately called my Uncle Robert, who'd been handling the legal aspects of my situation. Within hours, we had a meeting scheduled with the FBI's white-collar crime division. Corporate espionage was a federal offense, and if Marcus was right, Derek and Vanessa were looking at serious prison time. Tuesday brought another bombshell, this one from an unexpected source. Derek's ex-girlfriend from college, Amanda Rodriguez, reached out through social media after seeing posts about the rehearsal dinner scandal. "Tina, I'm so sorry about what happened to you," she wrote, "but I think you should know, Derek did the exact same thing to me 5 years ago. He cheated with my roommate, then tried to gaslight me into thinking I was paranoid and jealous." Amanda agreed to meet me for coffee that afternoon. What she told me painted Derek as a serial cheater with a specific pattern of targeting women in his girlfriend's inner circle. "He gets off on the deception," Amanda explained. "It's not just about the physical affair, it's about the psychological manipulation. He told my roommate the same things he probably told your sister, about how I was boring and didn't understand him. She showed me screenshots she'd saved from 5 years ago, messages between Derek and her roommate that were nearly identical to the ones I'd found between Derek and Vanessa. The language, the manipulation tactics, even the timing of when the affair escalated, it was all eerily similar." "There was another girl, too, between me and you," Amanda continued. "Jessica Miller. He was engaged to her 2 years ago. The engagement ended when she caught him with her coworker." My hands trembled as I processed this information. Derek wasn't just a cheater. He was a predator who systematically destroyed relationships for his own entertainment, and I'd almost married him. Wednesday brought confirmation of what Marcus had suspected. The FBI investigation revealed that Derek had indeed been passing confidential information to Vanessa, who had been sharing it with her superiors at Peterson and Associates. Email records showed a clear pattern of information exchange that coincided with their affair timeline. But the investigation uncovered something even more disturbing. Vanessa hadn't just seduced Derek for business reasons, she'd been specifically assigned to do it by her boss at Peterson and Associates, Richard Peterson himself. Agent Sarah Collins from the FBI Cybercrimes Unit called me with the details. "Miss Morrison, we've been tracking Peterson and Associates for suspected corporate espionage for over a year.
Your sister was essentially acting as a honey trap, specifically targeting Derek Sullivan because of his access to sensitive client information. The room spun around me. Are you telling me this whole thing was planned from the beginning? The evidence suggests your sister was assigned to seduce Mr. Sullivan approximately 3 months ago. The personal relationship between them may have developed genuine feelings, but the initial contact was purely professional. I felt sick. Vanessa hadn't just betrayed me as a sister, she'd betrayed me as part of a calculated business operation. Every moment of our sisterly bonding over wedding planning had been a lie designed to give her access to Derek and, through him, to his company's secrets.
Thursday brought the most devastating revelation yet. While cleaning out Derek's belongings from our apartment, I found a hidden tablet tucked behind his dresser. When I turned it on, I discovered something that made everything else pale in comparison. Derek had been recording intimate moments between us without my consent. Hundreds of photos and videos spanning our entire 3-year relationship were stored on this device, along with similar content from his previous relationships with Amanda and Jessica. The violation was so complete, so comprehensive, that I couldn't even process it at first. Every private moment, every vulnerable instance of intimacy had been documented and stored like trophies. Some of the files were even labeled with dates and ratings, as if he was scoring our intimate encounters. But worse than the recordings themselves were the accompanying text files, detailed notes about each woman's insecurities, fears, and emotional vulnerabilities. Derek had been systematically documenting how to manipulate and control the women in his life. One file labeled Tina, Psychological Profile, contained observations that made my skin crawl. Desperate for family approval. Fear of abandonment stems from the father's emotional distance. Sister relationship is the primary vulnerability, exploited through Vanessa's involvement in wedding planning. He'd planned everything. The affair with Vanessa wasn't just opportunity or attraction. It was a deliberate psychological manipulation designed to destroy me in the most painful way possible. Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after my rehearsal dinner revelation, I sat in Agent Collins' office with my Uncle Robert and 3 other federal investigators. The evidence we'd uncovered painted Derek and Vanessa as part of a larger criminal conspiracy involving corporate espionage, wire fraud, and multiple counts of non-consensual intimate recording. "Miss Morrison," Agent Collins said, "your courage in exposing this situation has helped us uncover one of the largest corporate espionage rings we've seen in the Pacific Northwest. Peterson and Associates has been operating this honey trap scheme for over 3 years, targeting employees at competing firms throughout Oregon and Washington." The scope was staggering. Vanessa wasn't the only agent. Peterson had employed at least 6 other women to seduce men with access to valuable business information. Dozens of companies had been victimized, losing millions of dollars in stolen contracts and intellectual property. But the personal crimes were equally serious. Derek's hidden recordings violated federal privacy laws, and similar evidence was found in raids on his previous residences. Amanda, Jessica, and at least 4 other women had been victimized in the same way. "What happens now?" I asked. "Derek Sullivan is looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison on multiple charges. Your sister faces similar time for conspiracy, wire fraud, and her role in the espionage ring. Richard Peterson and his entire operation are going down." As I left the FBI office that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began: genuine closure. What had started as a personal betrayal had revealed a criminal conspiracy that had victimized dozens of people. By exposing Derek and Vanessa, I'd inadvertently brought justice for far more people than just myself. 6 months later, Derek pleaded guilty to avoid trial and received 18 years in federal prison. Vanessa got 12 years after cooperating with prosecutors. Peterson and Associates was shut down, and Richard Peterson received 25 years for masterminding the entire operation. The other victims in Derek's recording scheme formed a support group that helped us all heal from the violation and manipulation we'd endured.
Amanda became one of my closest friends, and together we started a foundation to help other women recognize and escape from manipulative relationships. As for me, I eventually realized that Derek's betrayal had actually saved me from a lifetime of psychological abuse. His need to destroy me had inadvertently set me free. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Sometimes justice comes in forms you never expected. And sometimes the sister who betrays you ends up doing you the biggest favor of your life. 2 years after that catastrophic rehearsal dinner, I stood in a federal courthouse in downtown Portland, watching as the final chapter of this nightmare officially closed. Richard Peterson, the mastermind behind the corporate espionage ring, was being sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. It was the last sentencing in a case that had consumed 2 years of investigations, trials, and revelations that kept getting more shocking. The courtroom was packed with victims, FBI agents, and journalists covering what had become known as the honey trap conspiracy. Sitting in the gallery, I spotted familiar faces: Amanda Rodriguez, Jessica Miller, and 8 other women who'd been victimized by Derek's recording scheme. We'd all testified during the various trials, supporting each other through the difficult process of reliving our trauma in front of strangers. As Peterson received his sentence, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that October evening when I thought I was just exposing a cheating fiancé. What I'd actually done was blow the lid off a criminal enterprise that had been operating for over 5 years. The ripple effects had been enormous. The FBI investigation had uncovered similar operations in 12 other states, leading to 47 arrests and the recovery of over $30 million in stolen intellectual property. My decision to publicly expose Derek and Vanessa had triggered the largest corporate espionage bust in Pacific Northwest history. But the personal journey had been just as transformative. After the trials ended, I'd taken a leave of absence from my tech job to focus on the Survivor Support Foundation that Amanda and I had created. Phoenix Rising had grown from a small support group into a national organization, helping women escape manipulative relationships and rebuild their lives. As for me, I eventually realized that Derek's betrayal had actually saved me from a lifetime of psychological abuse. His need to destroy me had inadvertently set me free. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Sometimes justice comes in forms you never expected. And sometimes the sister who betrays you ends up doing you the biggest favor of your life. 2 years after that catastrophic rehearsal dinner, I stood in a federal courthouse in downtown Portland, watching as the final chapter of this nightmare officially closed. Richard Peterson, the mastermind behind the corporate espionage ring, was being sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. It was the last sentencing in a case that had consumed 2 years of investigations, trials, and revelations that kept getting more shocking. The courtroom was packed with victims, FBI agents, and journalists covering what had become known as the honey trap conspiracy. Sitting in the gallery, I spotted familiar faces: Amanda Rodriguez, Jessica Miller, and 8 other women who'd been victimized by Derek's recording scheme. We'd all testified during the various trials, supporting each other through the difficult process of reliving our trauma in front of strangers. As Peterson received his sentence, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that October evening when I thought I was just exposing a cheating fiancé. What I'd actually done was blow the lid off a criminal enterprise that had been operating for over 5 years. The ripple effects had been enormous. The FBI investigation had uncovered similar operations in 12 other states, leading to 47 arrests and the recovery of over $30 million in stolen intellectual property. My decision to publicly expose Derek and Vanessa had triggered the largest corporate espionage bust in Pacific Northwest history. But the personal journey had been just as transformative. After the trials ended, I'd taken a leave of absence from my tech job to focus on the Survivor Support Foundation that Amanda and I had created. Phoenix Rising had grown from a small support group into a national organization, helping women escape manipulative relationships and rebuild their lives.
Our work had led to partnerships with law enforcement agencies across the country, training programs for prosecutors handling domestic manipulation cases, and a national hotline that had fielded over 10,000 calls in its first year. What started as my personal disaster had become a mission to prevent other women from experiencing similar betrayals. The most surprising development has been my relationship with my parents. The crisis had forced us to address years of family dysfunction, particularly the favoritism that had enabled Vanessa's manipulative behavior throughout our childhood. Family therapy had been painful but transformative, leading to the strongest relationship I'd ever had with my mother and father. My mother, in particular, had struggled with guilt over how she'd enabled Vanessa's behavior over the years. I always made excuses for her, she'd admitted during one of our therapy sessions. I told myself she was just spirited, just confident. I never wanted to see that she was actually cruel. The work we'd done together had healed wounds I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly supported by my family, rather than constantly competing for approval with my manipulative sister. As for Vanessa herself, she'd served 18 months of her 12-year sentence when she was found dead in her federal prison cell. The official cause was suicide, but those of us who knew her suspected it was more about her inability to handle being powerless and without admirers. Vanessa had always needed to be the center of attention, and prison had stripped away every tool she'd used to manipulate people throughout her life. I felt surprisingly little when I learned of her death. The grief I might have expected was overshadowed by a sense of relief that she could never hurt anyone else the way she'd hurt me. The sister I'd grown up with had disappeared long before she died. Maybe she'd never really existed at all. Derek's fate had been quite different. He'd adjusted to prison life with the same manipulative skills he'd used in the outside world, though with much less success. According to Amanda, who occasionally checked prison records out of morbid curiosity, he'd been transferred 3 times for attempting to manipulate other inmates and had spent significant time in solitary confinement. The hidden recordings case had been particularly satisfying to prosecute. Federal privacy laws had been strengthened partially because of our case, making non-consensual intimate recording a more serious federal crime with mandatory minimum sentences. Derek's 18-year sentence had sent a clear message that this type of violation would be met with severe consequences. More importantly, all of his victims had received significant financial settlements from a victim compensation fund established using assets seized from the espionage ring. The money couldn't undo the violation, but it had allowed several of us to pursue therapy, education, and new career paths without financial stress. My own settlement had funded Phoenix Rising's operations for its first 2 years, allowing us to help hundreds of other survivors without worrying about fundraising. The irony that Derek's crimes had funded an organization dedicated to helping his victims wasn't lost on any of us. 3 months after Peterson's sentencing, I received an unexpected visitor at Phoenix Rising's Portland office. A young woman named Claire Thompson had driven from Seattle after finding our organization online. Her story was heartbreakingly familiar. A manipulative boyfriend who'd isolated her from friends and family, recorded intimate moments without consent, and systematically destroyed her self-esteem. "I saw your story on the news," she told me, tears streaming down her face. "When you exposed your fiancé at your rehearsal dinner, it made me realize that what's happening to me isn't normal, isn't my fault." Helping Claire rebuild her life reminded me why all the pain and publicity had been worth it. She wasn't the first survivor to credit my story with helping her recognize her own situation, and she wouldn't be the last. The courage I'd found that night at the Grand Ballroom had rippled outward, empowering other women to escape their own toxic situations. Claire eventually became one of our most effective advocates, using her experience to help other survivors recognize manipulation tactics and develop safety plans. Watching her transform from a broken, isolated victim into a confident advocate was deeply fulfilling in a way I'd never experienced in my corporate career. As I write this final chapter, it's been 3 years since that rehearsal dinner that changed everything. I'm engaged again, this time to Marcus Chen, the former colleague who'd first alerted me to the corporate espionage angle. Our relationship developed slowly through the trials and foundation work built on complete honesty and mutual respect. Marcus had actually been Derek's friend before discovering the truth about his character.
His decision to come forward with information that helped expose the espionage ring had cost him friendships, but earned him something more valuable: a clear conscience and the respect of everyone who mattered. Our wedding is planned for next spring, a small ceremony with just immediate family and close friends. No elaborate rehearsal dinners, no dramatic presentations, just a simple celebration of genuine love built on trust and transparency. Sometimes people ask if I regret how I handled the situation, whether I should have confronted Derek and Vanessa privately instead of exposing them publicly. The answer is always no. Their betrayal was public, carried out in front of friends, family, and colleagues who trusted them. Public exposure was the only response that matched the scope of their deception. More importantly, my decision to expose them publicly prevented them from continuing to victimize others. If I'd handled it privately, Derek would have moved on to his next victim, and Vanessa would have continued her role in the espionage ring. The embarrassment of one evening prevented years of additional crimes.
The rehearsal dinner revelation had been about more than revenge. It had been about justice, accountability, and protection of future victims. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior, even when that someone is your sister. The foundation's growth had exceeded every expectation. What started as a small support group had expanded into a comprehensive program offering legal assistance, therapy referrals, financial planning for survivors, and even job placement services. We'd opened satellite offices in 6 major cities and were planning international expansion. One of our most successful initiatives was the Truth Teller program, where survivors shared their stories in corporate settings, universities, and community centers. These presentations had prevented countless manipulative relationships by teaching people to recognize red flags early. The program's name came from what Derek's victims had started calling me, the truth teller who changed everything. The corporate world had taken notice too. Major companies were now implementing stricter policies around workplace relationships and information security, partly due to the Peterson case. Human resources departments across the country were using our training materials to help employees recognize and report suspicious relationship patterns that might indicate corporate espionage. My own transformation had been profound in ways I was still discovering. The shy, people-pleasing woman who'd been afraid to confront her sister about minor slights had become someone who regularly testified before Congress about corporate crime prevention and victim rights. I'd spoken at international conferences about psychological manipulation and had been interviewed by major news networks about recognizing predatory behavior. The media attention had been overwhelming at first. My story had gone viral within days of the first news reports, spawning countless articles, podcasts, and even a documentary film. Initially, I'd hated the publicity, but I'd learned to use it strategically to advance Phoenix Rising's mission and help other survivors feel less alone. One interview that particularly stayed with me was with a journalist who asked whether I'd ever considered what might have happened if I'd married Derek without discovering the truth. The question had haunted me for weeks, leading me to research his previous relationships more thoroughly. What I discovered was chilling. Jessica Miller, Derek's ex-fiancée before me, had suffered a complete nervous breakdown after their relationship ended. She'd been hospitalized for severe depression and had lost her job due to the psychological trauma Derek had inflicted. Amanda Rodriguez had fared better, but still carried deep trust issues that had affected every relationship since Derek. Meeting these women during the trial proceedings had shown me the trajectory my life would have taken. Derek's manipulation wasn't just cruel, it was systematically designed to destroy his victim's sense of reality and self-worth. Marriage would have given him legal and financial control that would have made escape nearly impossible. The recording evidence had revealed the calculated nature of his psychological abuse. He documented not just intimate moments, but also emotional breakdowns, arguments, and vulnerable conversations. These recordings were accompanied by analysis notes about which manipulation techniques were most effective with each victim. One particularly disturbing file contained Derek's playbook for psychological control, a step-by-step guide he'd developed for isolating victims from support systems, undermining their confidence, and creating financial dependence. The document read like a manual for creating the perfect victim, and it had been refined through each relationship. During his sentencing hearing, several of us had given victim impact statements.
Mine had focused not just on the personal betrayal, but on the broader implications of his systematic abuse. Derek Sullivan didn't just cheat on me, I told the judge. He operated a psychological torture chamber disguised as romantic relationships. Every woman who trusted him became a subject in his experiment to see how completely he could control another human being. The judge had been visibly shaken by the evidence and testimonies. In imposing the 18-year sentence, she'd noted that Derek represented a particularly dangerous form of predator who weaponizes intimacy against his victims. The sentence had become a landmark case in prosecuting psychological abuse alongside more traditional crimes. Vanessa's story had become equally instructive for our foundation's work. Her background research had revealed a pattern of manipulation dating back to high school, where she'd systematically destroyed friendships and romantic relationships for entertainment. Teachers and former classmates had come forward during the investigation with stories of her calculated cruelty that painted a picture of someone incapable of genuine empathy. Her role in the espionage ring hadn't been her first brush with criminal behavior either. College records showed she'd been suspected of academic fraud, and previous employers had reported missing client information after she'd left their companies. The Peterson organization had recruited her specifically because of her demonstrated willingness to betray trust for personal gain. Understanding Vanessa's pathology has been crucial for my healing process. Therapy had helped me realize that her betrayal wasn't about my inadequacies as a sister, but about her fundamental inability to form genuine human connections. She'd viewed our relationship as a resource to be exploited rather than a bond to be cherished. The family therapy sessions had unearthed decades of manipulation that I'd normalized as typical sibling rivalry. Vanessa had systematically sabotaged my relationships, undermined my achievements, and used family gatherings to gather information she could later use against me. Her involvement in my wedding planning wasn't sisterly support, it had been reconnaissance for her assigned mission. My parents' growth throughout this process has been remarkable to witness. They'd enrolled in courses about enabling behaviors and had become advocates for other families dealing with manipulative children. My father, in particular, had struggled with guilt over his emotional
distance during our childhood, recognizing how it had made me vulnerable to seeking approval from untrustworthy sources. The extended family had rallied around me in unexpected ways. Cousins who'd barely spoken to me before the scandal had become regular supporters of Phoenix Rising. My grandmother, despite her age, had become one of our most effective fundraisers, using her social connections to build awareness about psychological manipulation among her peer group. One of the most meaningful developments had been connecting with other families who'd experienced similar betrayals. We'd discovered that siblings-in-law manipulation was more common than anyone realized, often used by predators specifically because it created maximum psychological damage while appearing less threatening to outsiders. Phoenix Rising had developed specialized programming for these cases, recognizing that family betrayal required different healing approaches than stranger manipulation. The support groups for family betrayal survivors had become some of our most requested services, helping people navigate the complex emotions of loving someone who deliberately hurt them. The legal precedents set by our case had extended far beyond criminal prosecutions. Civil courts were now recognizing psychological manipulation as grounds for enhanced damages in divorce proceedings. Several states had strengthened their privacy laws specifically because of the hidden recording evidence from Derek's case. Professional licensing boards had also taken action. Derek's marketing credentials had been permanently revoked, and several other professions had implemented new ethics requirements around intimate partner behavior. The message was clear. Predatory behavior in personal relationships reflected character issues that made someone unfit for professional trust. As Phoenix Rising approached its 3rd anniversary, we were planning our largest fundraising gala yet. The event would honor survivors who'd become advocates and recognize the law enforcement officials who'd supported our mission. Marcus and I were using our engagement announcement at the gala as an opportunity to demonstrate that healing and genuine love were possible after betrayal. The invitation list read like a who's who of survivor advocacy, law enforcement, and corporate reform. FBI agent Sarah Collins would be receiving our highest honor for her work on the Peterson case. Amanda Rodriguez would be presenting our new scholarship program for survivors pursuing advanced education. Even Jessica Miller, who'd initially been too traumatized to participate in foundation activities, had agreed to share her recovery story.
Planning this celebration had brought home how far all of us had come. The broken, devastated woman who'd stood at that rehearsal dinner microphone 3 years ago barely resembled the confident advocate I'd become. The work hadn't just healed my wounds, it had transformed them into tools for helping others heal theirs. Looking back, I realized that Derek and Vanessa had actually given me an incredible gift. Their betrayal had forced me to discover strength I didn't know I possessed, led me to meaningful work that used my experience to help others, and ultimately brought me to a relationship based on genuine love rather than manipulation and control. My sister had laughed when she told me she'd seduced my fiancé. She thought she was destroying my life. Instead, she'd set me free to build a life better than anything I'd ever imagined. And that, more than any punishment or prison sentence, was the ultimate justice. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.